The morning sunshine streamed through the windows of Roosevelt High School's mathematics classroom, but for Sarah Chen, it felt anything but warm and welcoming. The 15-year-old transfer student sat in her usual spot in the third row, trying to make herself as small as possible. It was only her third week at the new school, and already she dreaded every minute of Ms. Walker's advanced algebra class. Sarah had always been a good student back in her old school in California, but here in this new city, everything felt different. The teaching methods were different, the students were different, and most importantly, Ms. Walker was very different from any teacher she had ever known. As the clock struck 10:30 a.m., Ms. Walker strode into the classroom with her usual stern expression. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and rectangle glasses that she'd often looked over when disapproving of something, which was frequently. Her high heels clicked against the floor like a metronome counting down to someone's doom. "Pop quiz time," Ms. Walker announced, causing the entire class to groan. "I need someone to solve yesterday's homework problem on the board. Let's see." Her eyes scanned the room, and Sarah's heart began to race. "Please not me," she silently prayed. "Miss Chen," Ms. Walker's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Since you seem to be daydreaming, why don't you come up and show us how to solve problem number 17? Sarah's hands began to tremble as she slowly rose from her seat. The 20-step walk to the whiteboard felt like walking through quicksand. She could feel 27 pairs of eyes following her every move, and her cheeks burned red with anxiety. The problem on the board looked like it was written in an alien language. Sarah knew she had solved something similar in her homework, but under the harsh fluorescent lights and Ms. Walker's scrutinizing gaze, all that knowledge seemed to evaporate from her mind. "We're waiting, Miss Chen," Ms. Walker said, tapping her foot impatiently. "This is a basic algebraic equation. Surely, you didn't make it to advanced algebra without knowing how to solve for x." Sarah's hand shook as she picked up the marker. She wrote the first step, then hesitated. A few students in the back began to whisper, and someone stifled a laugh. "Wrong." Ms. Walker's voice boomed through the classroom. "That's completely incorrect. Did you even read the chapter, Miss Chen? Or do you expect to coast through this class on your pretty handwriting alone?" Sarah's vision began to blur with tears she desperately tried to hold back. She attempted to erase her work, but her hands were shaking so badly that she only managed to smear the numbers across the board. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Ms. Walker marched to the front. "Not only do you not know the material, but you can't even erase properly. I have to wonder how you managed to maintain your GPA at your previous school. Perhaps they had different standards." The way she said different standards made it clear what she really meant, and a few more students giggled. Emma Thompson, sitting in the front row, looked uncomfortable and glanced between Sarah and her phone, which she held under her desk. I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "May I please sit down?" "Yes, please do. We wasted enough class time." Ms. Walker's words dripped with disappointment. "And see me after class. We need to discuss your performance and whether advanced algebra is really the right place for you." As Sarah walked back to her seat, she noticed something that Ms. Walker didn't. A shadow moving outside the classroom door's window. Someone had been standing there, listening to the entire exchange. But in her state of humiliation, this detail barely registered in her mind. She slumped into her chair, trying to make herself invisible as Ms. Walker called Katie Martinez, the class's top student, to solve the problem properly. The remainder of the class passed in a blur of shame and anxiety, with Sarah unable to focus on anything except the burning sensation in her chest and the occasional pitying glances from her classmates. What Sarah didn't know was that this horrific morning would soon set in motion a chain of events that would change not only her life, but the entire culture of Roosevelt High School. The shadow outside the door belonged to someone who had the power to make that change happen, and they had heard everything. Dr. James Martinez stood silently outside Ms. Walker's classroom, his hand frozen halfway to the door handle. As the new superintendent of the school district, he had planned to spend the morning doing routine classroom observations. What he witnessed instead made his blood run cold. The scene before him brought back painful memories of his own school days. 30 years ago, he had been that scared student at the board, struggling with a stutter while his teacher mocked his speech. Now, watching history repeat itself through Sarah Chen's humiliation, he felt a deep responsibility to act. Rather than entering the classroom immediately, Dr. Martinez pulled out his phone and began taking notes. Time, 10:43 a.m. Location, room 204. Teacher, Ms. Rebecca Walker. As a veteran educator with 25 years of experience in school administration, he knew the importance of documenting everything properly. Through the door's window, he could see several students recording the incident on their phones. One girl in particular, Emma Thompson, according to the seating chart he had reviewed earlier, seemed especially concerned, carefully hiding her phone beneath her desk as she captured the entire exchange. As Sarah walked back to her seat, Dr. Martinez quickly stepped away from the door, not wanting to be seen. He walked briskly to his office, his mind already forming a plan. This wasn't just about one incident or one teacher. This was about changing the entire school culture. In his office, Dr. Martinez immediately called Principal Roberts. "Diana, I need you to clear your schedule for lunch period. What I just witnessed in Ms. Walker's class requires immediate attention." His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of his 25 years in education. While waiting for the lunch meeting, Dr. Martinez reviewed Ms. Walker's personnel file. Her academic credentials were impressive: a master's degree in mathematics education, multiple teaching awards from her previous school, and consistently high student test scores. But something caught his eye. 3 formal complaints in the past 2 years about her teaching methods, all mysteriously withdrawn within days of being filed. At exactly 12:30 p.m., Principal Roberts entered his office. She was a capable administrator who had run Roosevelt High School for 8 years, but her expression showed concern. "James, what's going on?" Your message sounded urgent. Dr. Martinez played the audio recording he had made from outside the classroom. Principal Roberts's face grew increasingly troubled as she listened to Ms. Walker's harsh words and the students' uncomfortable laughter. "This isn't just about hurt feelings," Dr. Martinez explained, leaning forward in his chair. "This is about educational trauma. I lived through it myself, and it took me years to overcome the damage." He touched his throat unconsciously, remembering his own struggles with speech. "But Rebecca Walker has some of the highest test scores in the district," Principal Roberts protested weakly, though her voice betrayed her discomfort with the situation. "At what cost?" Dr. Martinez pulled out a stack of papers. "I've been reviewing student transfer requests. Did you notice that 23 students have switched out of her classes this semester alone? That's not success, that's survival." Just then, his office phone rang. It was the school counselor, Mrs. Garcia. "Dr. Martinez, I have a very upset student here. Sarah Chen. She's asking to drop advanced algebra, and she's too distraught to return to class." Dr. Martinez exchanged glances with Principal Roberts. "Tell Sarah to stay there. We'll be right down." He gathered his notes and stood up. "Diana, this ends today. We're not just going to address this incident. We're going to use it as a catalyst for real change." As they walked to the counselor's office, they passed Ms. Walker's classroom. Through the window, they could see her teaching as if nothing had happened, while empty seats scattered throughout the room told a different story. One student, Emma Thompson, caught Dr. Martinez's eye and gave him a meaningful look, holding up her phone slightly. Dr. Martinez nodded almost imperceptibly. By the end of the day, there would be more than just his audio recording as evidence. The time had come for Roosevelt High School to learn a valuable lesson, one that wouldn't be taught with humiliation or fear, but with empathy, understanding, and proper administrative action. The counselor's office was quiet except for Sarah's occasional sniffles. Mrs. Garcia, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, handed her another tissue while Emma Thompson sat supportively next to her friend. After the incident in class, Emma had asked for a bathroom pass and rushed straight to the counselor's office to check on Sarah. "Look what I recorded," Emma said softly, showing her phone to Sarah. The video was clear, capturing Ms. Walker's harsh words, the uncomfortable shuffling of students, and Sarah's trembling hands at the whiteboard. "You're not alone in this anymore. We can prove what happened." Sarah stared at the video, tears forming again in her eyes. "But what's the point? She's Ms. Walker. Nothing ever changes with her." Her voice was barely a whisper, still shaky from the morning's events. Just then, the office door opened. Dr. Martinez and Principal Roberts entered, their faces showing genuine concern. Sarah immediately tensed up, expecting more trouble, but Emma grabbed her hand reassuringly. Sarah, Dr. Martinez began gently, pulling up a chair to sit at eye level with her. I want you to know that I witnessed everything that happened in class today. I was outside the door, and what Ms. Walker did was completely unacceptable. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. The superintendent himself had seen her humiliation. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or more embarrassed. Emma, Principal Roberts turned to the other student. Would you be willing to share the video you recorded? Emma nodded confidently. I already sent it to my cloud storage, and I have videos from other days too. I've been documenting Ms. Walker's behavior for weeks. She pulled out a small notebook with dates and times. I'm not the only one. At least 6 other students have recordings. Dr. Martinez and Principal Roberts exchanged impressed looks. These students had been more organized and proactive than they had imagined. There's more, Emma continued, her confidence growing. Remember Jenny from last semester? She switched schools because of Ms. Walker. And Miguel from my Spanish class? He dropped advanced algebra, even though he needs it for college applications. I have their messages too. As Emma spoke, other students began gathering outside the counselor's office. Word had spread quickly about what happened in class. Lucy, a senior student council member, knocked and entered with a folder in her hands. I'm sorry to interrupt, Lucy said, but we've been collecting anonymous statements about Ms. Walker all year. She handed the folder to Dr. Martinez. There are 37 accounts in here, but most students were too scared to come forward officially. Dr. Martinez opened the folder and began reading. His expression grew more serious with each page. These weren't just complaints about strict teaching. These were documented cases of systematic humiliation and emotional abuse. Principal Roberts looked through the statements as well, her face showing a mix of shock and guilt. Why didn't we see this before? She whispered. Because Ms. Walker is careful, Emma explained. She targets students who are new or shy or struggling. She never acts this way during official observations, and she's really nice to the top students. Sarah listened to everything, hardly believing what was happening. Just an hour ago, she had felt completely alone and powerless. Now, sitting in this office surrounded by support, she felt something changing inside her. What happens now? Sarah asked quietly, looking at Dr. Martinez. He straightened in his chair, his decision already made. First, you're not going back to that classroom today. Neither is anyone else who feels unsafe. He turned to Principal Roberts. We'll need to arrange for a substitute teacher immediately. And Ms. Walker? Emma asked what everyone was thinking. She'll be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Principal Roberts answered firmly. We have more than enough evidence to justify immediate action. As if on cue, more students appeared at the office window, each holding their phones, ready to share their stories. What had started as one horrible morning for Sarah had unleashed a flood of pent-up voices. Dr. Martinez stood up, addressing everyone in the now crowded office. This stops today. Roosevelt High School is going to change, and your courage, he looked at Sarah, then at Emma and the others, is going to help make that happen. For the first time that day, Sarah felt a small smile forming on her face. Sometimes, she realized, the worst moments in life could lead to unexpected victories, especially when you weren't fighting alone anymore. The next morning, Roosevelt High School buzzed with energy. News of Ms. Walker's administrative leave spread quickly through the student body like wildfire. The hallways were filled with whispered conversations, and for the first time in years, students walked to advanced algebra without knots in their stomachs. Emma had created a private group chat called Standing Together, which now included over 50 students who had experienced or witnessed Ms. Walker's behavior. Messages of support flooded the chat, along with stories that had been kept secret for too long. Did you see the email from Dr. Martinez? Typed Jenny, who had transferred to another school last semester. He wants to talk to all of us, even former students who left because of Ms. Walker. Sarah sat in the school library during her free period, reading through the messages on her phone. The shy girl who could barely speak up yesterday was now part of something much bigger than herself. Next to her sat Miguel, who had dropped advanced algebra earlier in the year. He was helping her understand the math concepts that had seemed impossible under Ms. Walker's teaching. See, Miguel explained patiently, drawing a diagram on paper. These equations aren't actually that hard when someone explains them properly. Ms. Walker just made everything feel impossible. The substitute teacher, Mr. Roberts, no relation to the principal, was a retired math professor who had a completely different teaching style. In just one day, he had already changed the classroom atmosphere. Students were encouraged to ask questions, and mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than failures. During lunch break, Dr. Martinez called a special assembly. The school auditorium filled quickly, with students whispering among themselves about what might happen next. "Good afternoon, everyone," Dr. Martinez began, standing at the podium. "I want to talk to you about courage and change." He adjusted his tie, looking out at the sea of young faces. "Yesterday, something remarkable happened. One student's pain became visible, and instead of looking away, you all stood up." Sarah, sitting between Emma and Lucy in the middle row, felt her cheeks warm as several students glanced her way with supportive smiles. "But this isn't just about one incident or one teacher," Dr. Martinez continued. "This is about creating a school where every student feels safe to learn, to make mistakes, and to grow. Today, we're announcing several immediate changes." Principal Roberts joined him on stage, holding a stack of papers. "First, we're establishing the Student Safety Council. This group will include representatives from each grade, working directly with administration to address concerns about teaching methods and classroom environment." Lucy, the senior who had collected the anonymous statements, was named as the council's first president. She stood up briefly, receiving enthusiastic applause from her peers. Second, Dr. Martinez announced, "We're implementing a new anonymous reporting system. No student should ever feel powerless or afraid to speak up." He held up a tablet showing a simple app interface. "This platform will allow direct communication with administration while protecting student privacy." The assembly continued with more announcements: mandatory sensitivity training for all teachers, regular classroom climate surveys, and a peer tutoring program to help students who had fallen behind due to fear or anxiety in their classes. After the assembly, Sarah found herself surrounded by classmates she had barely spoken to before. "You should join the Student Safety Council," suggested Carlos, a quiet boy who sat behind her in class. "Your experience started all this." I don't know if I'm ready for that," Sarah replied hesitantly. "You're more ready than you think," Emma encouraged her. "Look how much has changed because you didn't give up." As they walked to their next class, Sarah noticed something different in the hallways. Students were walking taller, talking more openly. Even the teachers seemed different, making extra efforts to greet students warmly and check on their understanding. Mr. Roberts caught up with Sarah outside the math classroom. "I looked at your previous work," he said kindly. "You have a good mathematical mind, Sarah. You just needed the right environment to show it." Sarah smiled, feeling a confidence she had never known before. The girl who had wanted to disappear yesterday was now part of making visible changes in her school. As she took her seat in class, she realized that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the most important transformations, not just for one person, but for an entire community. 1 week after the incident, Ms. Walker sat nervously in the district office, facing the school board and Dr. Martinez. The room was tense as they reviewed the extensive evidence against her: dozens of student testimonials, video recordings, and a thick folder of complaints that had previously been swept under the rug. "Ms. Walker," Dr. Martinez began, his voice firm but not unkind, "we've been reviewing your 15-year teaching career at Roosevelt High. While your students' test scores are impressive, the emotional cost has been far too high." Ms. Walker's usually confident demeanor cracked slightly. "I was just maintaining high standards," she defended herself, though her voice wavered. "These students need to be prepared for the real world." "The real world?" Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Doesn't require humiliation to achieve success. Let me share something personal with you." He touched his throat, a habit from his days of speech therapy. "I was once a student who faced similar treatment because of my stutter. It didn't make me stronger. It nearly destroyed my love for learning." Meanwhile, back at Roosevelt High, Sarah was experiencing a completely different kind of mathematics class. Mr. Roberts had introduced a new learning system where students worked in small groups, supporting each other through difficult problems. "Sarah, could you explain how you solved this?" asked Katie Martinez, the former top student who had once seemed so intimidating. Your approach is really creative. Sarah, still getting used to positive attention, explained her solution. Her voice grew stronger with each word as her classmates listened attentively. Even more surprising was that other students had started coming to her for help with certain types of problems. Back in the district office, Ms. Walker was shown the transformation taking place in her former classroom. Mr. Roberts had documented the progress of several students who had previously struggled under her teaching. Look at these results. Principal Roberts pointed to a chart. Same students, same material, but taught with encouragement instead of fear. Their test scores haven't dropped. In fact, many have improved. Ms. Walker stared at the numbers, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time, she seemed to really see the impact of her methods. I never meant to harm anyone, she whispered. I thought I was pushing them to excellence. Dr. Martinez slid a folder across the table. We're offering you a choice, Ms. Walker. Option 1 is resignation. Option 2, he tapped the folder, is a comprehensive rehabilitation program. It includes counseling, modern teaching methodology courses, and mentorship under experienced educators who achieve excellence through empowerment. As this meeting was happening, Sarah and Emma were presenting their experience to a group of teachers during an emergency professional development session. The shy girl who could barely speak in class a week ago was now sharing her story with educators from across the district. When you're afraid to make mistakes, Sarah explained, her voice clear and steady, you're afraid to learn. Every question feels like a trap, every error feels like failure. The teachers listened intently, many taking notes. Some looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing aspects of their own teaching methods that needed change. Others nodded in understanding, already planning how to make their classrooms more supportive. Back in the district office, Ms. Walker had made her decision. I'll take the rehabilitation program, she said quietly. I need to understand where I went wrong. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. Your first assignment is to attend tomorrow's student panel. Listen to their stories. Not to defend yourself, but to understand their experiences. As the sun set on another school day, Sarah sat in the library with her study group. They were preparing for their first major test under Mr. Roberts. The atmosphere was completely different from the stressed, competitive environment of Ms. Walker's class. You know what's weird? Sarah said to Emma as they solved practice problems. I'm actually looking forward to the test. Not because I know I'll get everything right, but because I'm not afraid of getting things wrong anymore. Emma smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. That's what real learning feels like, she replied. And look, you're even helping others now. Indeed, Sarah had gone from being the girl afraid to speak to becoming someone who helped others find their voice. The transformation wasn't just in her grades or her confidence. It was in the way she saw herself as part of a learning community where everyone had something to contribute. 2 weeks into her rehabilitation program, Ms. Walker sat at the back of the school auditorium, watching Mr. Roberts teach a demonstration class. The same students who had once trembled in her presence were now actively participating, raising their hands, and even laughing when they made mistakes. Today was different, though. Instead of just observing, Ms. Walker had been asked to attend a special session where students would share their stories. Sarah Chen, the student whose humiliation had sparked this change, would be speaking first. Sarah stood at the podium, her hands no longer shaking as they had that terrible day at the whiteboard. The auditorium was filled with teachers, administrators, and students from across the district. Even local education officials had come to learn from Roosevelt High's transformation. Before I start, Sarah said, her voice clear and confident, I want to acknowledge Ms. Walker's presence here today. A murmur went through the crowd as people turned to look at their former teacher. This isn't about blame anymore. It's about learning and growing together. Ms. Walker felt tears forming in her eyes. Her therapist had helped her understand that her harsh teaching methods stemmed from her own painful school experiences. She had become the kind of teacher she had feared as a child, believing it was the only way to push students toward success. Sarah continued her speech, sharing not just her story of humiliation, but also her journey of recovery. Last week, I got a B+ on my math test, she announced proudly. Under Ms. Walker, I would have seen this as failure. But Mr. Roberts taught me something important. Grades are just stepping stones. not final destinations. In the audience, Emma Thompson recorded the speech, just as she had recorded the original incident. But this time, she was capturing a moment of triumph rather than trauma. Next to her, Miguel, who had dropped advanced algebra, smiled. He had re-enrolled in the class under Mr. Roberts and was now helping tutor younger students. The real change, Sarah explained, wasn't just in how we were taught math, it was in how we began to see ourselves. We learned that making mistakes doesn't make us failures, it makes us learners. Dr. Martinez watched from the side of the stage, nodding in approval. The transformation he had witnessed over the past few weeks had exceeded his expectations. Test scores remained strong, but more importantly, student anxiety levels had dropped significantly, and class participation had soared. After Sarah's speech, Ms. Walker did something unexpected. She asked for permission to address the audience. As she walked to the podium, the room fell silent. "I've spent the past 2 weeks in intensive counseling and teacher training," she began, her voice heavy with emotion. "I watched videos of my classes, read student testimonials, and faced the harsh truth about my teaching methods." She paused, gathering courage. "I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong." The audience listened intently as Ms. Walker shared her own journey of realization. She talked about her childhood experiences with a cruel teacher, how she had internalized that trauma, and how she had unknowingly passed it on to her students. "Sarah," she turned to face her former student directly, "your courage in facing your fear didn't just change you, it changed me, it changed this entire school, and for that, I am deeply grateful." Mr. Roberts, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, stood up. "Ms. Walker has been attending my classes, not just observing, but learning new teaching methods. She's shown remarkable dedication to changing her approach." Principal Roberts then announced the next phase of Roosevelt High's transformation. Ms. Walker will be returning to teaching next semester, not as the same teacher she was, but as someone committed to nurturing rather than intimidating. She'll be team teaching with Mr. Roberts, learning and implementing positive teaching strategies. The announcement was met with mixed reactions, but Sarah's response surprised everyone. She walked over to Ms. Walker and offered her hand. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "That's what real education is about, isn't it? Learning from our mistakes and becoming better." Ms. Walker took Sarah's hand, tears now flowing freely. The auditorium erupted in applause, not just for Sarah's forgiveness, but for the powerful message it sent. True change was possible, and even the deepest wounds could heal when addressed with courage and compassion. As winter turned to spring at Roosevelt High School, the changes that had begun with one painful incident had blossomed into something remarkable. On this particular morning, students filed into what used to be Ms. Walker's classroom, now a joint teaching space shared by both Ms. Walker and Mr. Roberts. The room itself looked different. Gone were the stark white walls and rigid row arrangements. Instead, colorful math posters created by students decorated the space, and desks were arranged in small learning circles. But the biggest change wasn't in the room, it was in the people within it. Ms. Walker stood at the front, a transformed version of her former self. Her once severe bun was replaced by a gentler hairstyle, and her smile, now genuine and warm, reached her eyes. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted the class. "Today, we're starting our group projects, and I have a special announcement." Sarah Chen, sitting between Emma and Miguel, noticed something different in Ms. Walker's voice, excitement rather than intimidation. The teacher who had once humiliated her was now someone else entirely. "Our class has been selected to present at the State Education Conference," Ms. Walker announced proudly. "They want to learn about our collaborative learning model, the system we all built together." The students exchanged excited glances. Their class had become famous throughout the district for its innovative approach. Advanced students helping struggling ones, group problem-solving sessions, and most importantly, an environment where mistakes were celebrated as learning opportunities. And, Mr. Roberts added, stepping forward, they specifically requested that Sarah Chen lead the student presentation portion. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Public speaking at a state conference. 6 months ago, she couldn't even solve a problem at the whiteboard without trembling. Now, she felt a flutter of excitement rather than fear. Later that day, during lunch break, Sarah sat with Ms. Walker in the classroom, discussing the upcoming presentation. The scene would have been unimaginable months ago. Student and teacher, once adversaries, now planning together as equals. You know, Sarah, Ms. Walker said softly, I keep that video of that terrible day on my phone. She pulled out her device, though she didn't play it. Not to punish myself, but to remind me of how far we've both come. Sarah nodded, understanding. I keep it too, but I also keep the video from last week, when you helped Jessica overcome her fear of fractions. That's the real Ms. Walker. As they talked, Dr. Martinez appeared at the doorway. He had been making regular visits to observe the classroom's transformation. How are our presenters doing? He asked, entering with a smile. Dr. Martinez, Sarah brightened. I was just telling Ms. Walker my idea for the presentation. We want to show both the before and after, not to shame anyone, but to show that real change is possible. Ms. Walker added, We'll demonstrate how our new teaching methods work. Sarah will lead a live problem-solving session with students from other schools. The superintendent nodded approvingly. You've all created something special here. Did you know our student anxiety rates have dropped by 60% since implementing these changes? And our test scores? He grinned. They're better than ever. Just then, Emma poked her head in. Sarah, the Student Safety Council needs you. We're reviewing applications for peer tutors, and you're our best judge of teaching style. Before leaving, Sarah turned to Ms. Walker. Same time tomorrow to practice the presentation. Wouldn't miss it, Ms. Walker replied warmly. And Sarah? Thank you. Not just for forgiving me, but for helping me become a better teacher. As Sarah walked down the hallway with Emma, they passed the school's new motto, painted in bold letters. Mistakes are opportunities in disguise. Below it hung a photo of their class, Ms. Walker and Mr. Roberts standing with their students, all smiling genuinely. You know what's amazing? Emma mused. That horrible day turned into the best thing that could have happened to our school. Sarah thought about it. The day that it seemed like her worst nightmare had led to profound changes. A reformed teacher, a revolutionized classroom, and most surprisingly, her own transformation from a terrified student to a confident leader. Sometimes, Sarah replied, thinking of both Ms. Walker and herself, you have to face your worst moment to find your best self. 1 year had passed since that fateful day in Ms. Walker's classroom. The state education conference was being held in the Roosevelt High School auditorium, packed with educators, administrators, and students from across the country. The story of how one incident of humiliation led to a complete school transformation had spread far beyond their district. Sarah Chen, now a junior and president of the Student Safety Council, stood confidently at the podium. The terrified girl from a year ago was barely recognizable in this poised young woman addressing hundreds of people. Welcome to Roosevelt High, she began, her voice clear and strong. Our story began with tears, fear, and humiliation, but it evolved into something beautiful, a lesson about change, forgiveness, and the true meaning of education. In the front row, Ms. Walker sat next to Mr. Roberts, both wearing proud smiles. The once feared teacher now ran workshops helping other educators identify and change toxic teaching patterns. Her story of transformation had become as powerful as Sarah's. Today, Sarah continued, gesturing to the screen behind her, we're going to show you 2 videos. The first one might be difficult to watch. She nodded to Emma, who played the original classroom incident. The audience watched in silence as the old Ms. Walker humiliated a trembling Sarah at the whiteboard. Several educators wiped away tears, recognizing similar moments from their own classrooms, either as teachers or former students. Then, Emma played the second video, footage from their classroom last week. It showed Ms. Walker and Mr. Roberts' team teaching, students working in collaborative groups, and most notably, a student making a mistake and the entire class applauding as she figured out where she went wrong. This is the same classroom, the same teacher, and the same student, Sarah explained. But everything is different. Our test scores have improved by 40%. Student anxiety is down by 65%. And most importantly, we've created a community where learning isn't about fear, it's about growth. Dr. Martinez stepped up next, presenting the data that had attracted national attention. Roosevelt High's model isn't just about being nice, he explained. It's about creating an environment where students can take intellectual risks without fear of humiliation. Ms. Walker then joined Sarah on stage, a moment that caused murmurs throughout the audience. They had all read about their story, but seeing them together was powerful. "I was that teacher," Ms. Walker admitted to the crowd, "the one who believed fear motivated excellence, the one who confused humiliation with discipline. But Sarah, the very student I hurt the most, taught me the greatest lesson of my career, that real education happens when students feel safe enough to fail." The presentation continued with practical demonstrations. Sarah led a group of visiting students through a math problem, deliberately making mistakes and showing how they now used errors as teaching moments. The visitors were amazed to see students eagerly volunteering to show their work, unafraid of being wrong. Emma, now the school newspaper's editor, had created a documentary chronicling the year's changes. "We don't just teach differently," she explained, showing clips of their new learning methods. "We think differently about what education means." As the conference concluded, Sarah shared one final thought. "A year ago, I wanted to disappear. Today, I'm helping other schools learn from our journey. But the real hero of this story isn't me, or even the amazing changes we've made." She turned to Ms. Walker. "It's the courage to admit when we're wrong and the willingness to change." Dr. Martinez announced that the Roosevelt model would be implemented across the state, with Sarah, Ms. Walker, and Mr. Roberts training other schools in their methods. After the conference, as people filed out of the auditorium, a young student from another school approached Sarah. "I'm going through what you went through," she whispered. "My teacher." Sarah squeezed her hand and led her to Dr. Martinez. As they walked, she caught Ms. Walker's eye across the room. They shared a knowing smile. Their painful experience would help ensure that no other student would have to learn through humiliation. That evening, as Sarah packed up her presentation materials, she found a note from Ms. Walker. "Thank you for not just changing me, but for helping me change others. You didn't just overcome humiliation, you transformed it into hope." Sarah pinned the note to the classroom wall, right next to the original newspaper article about their story. The headline now seemed like a relic from another time. "Teacher humiliates shy girl in class, not knowing who's listening outside." Below it, someone had added in bold letters, "and changes education forever."